grappling with the relationship between joy and pleasure, and
Oh,
especially among Black queer people. Could you share your thoughts on how the experiences that these two describe overlap or differ? I'll be quick with mine and pass it to Fatima. I think what I am separating is I don't think that it's like so clean as individual and community, but I think uh, for me, I feel like pleasure feels more like an individualized pursuit. And I think joy feels like something that is uh, meant to be shared, even if it's initially experienced individually. That's why I'll stop.
Fatima, difference between joy and pleasure.
Yeah, I think this is so interesting. And I'm also like, I have a whole, before I came to my PhD program, I used to do HIV testing and advocacy. And like the conversations we would have about like pleasure and risk were really fascinating because that is what public health likes to do. And so I I I think one way to think about it to me is that like pleasure often gets painted as perhaps even more ephemeral than joy. It often gets painted as more about the body and more about like the somatic feeling of it, right? I don't know that that's always true, and I think that sometimes we do that because pleasure leads to a lot of behaviors that people in public health want to manage, right? And so
And it's also more stigmatized too, if we can just
pleasure is
name that.
absolutely stigmatized, right? And I think maybe joy, for the way that it gets talked about, is this more spiritual, higher level, right? That is less stigmatized. For me, specifically as Black queer people, I I don't care, right? Like catch it where you can is kind of where I'm at. And so like I think Elle's point about, you know, some things, how they're pursued and how they're cultivated is good. But for me, I'm almost more nervous about the ways that pleasure and joy get put on this like hierarchy than I am about trying to tease them apart.
And
Sorry
I
for that
also don't know if I
non-answer.
stand by the thing I just said anymore as I'm thinking about what you just said, because I'm thinking like about some of the queer enclaves that I navigate where people are in the heat of pursuing pleasure, and I have those moments of that feel like the same intersectional joy, and I'm not doing those things, but it's just like, oh, this space exists. And I'm talking, listen, I'm talking about like queer sex parties or things
Yeah.
like that where people are in the heat of those moments, and I'm feeling like a non-sexual joy because this space exists and we have this freedom. And so
Yes.
actually, I don't know if those, and that is shared. That is by definition shared. So maybe that hierarchy is a projection that, but it's not actually, maybe they're not so isolated. And this is an open question, really.
I was wondering if whether, when I thought about joy and pleasure, and I don't have a definition per se, but I started thinking about the difference between, or the comparisons between joy and contentment, right? So,
Mm.
not, sorry, not joy, sorry, I meant happiness, right? Which is fleeting, impermanent, it's going to be, like, oh, I'm really happy that I got that raise, and then you habituate and it's gone. Versus contentment is a state of, it's a state that's not really disturbed by loss or gain. And it's a positive, but it's not, happiness is like up there and down there. And I see, pleasure can be a lot of that as well, right? Just like high highs and then you're back down. High versus this joy when you do get it. You don't always get it, but when you do get it, it is this expansive, somatic, embodied, fulfilling, you know,
And it may be accessible to people to whom contentment is not as well.